Hi, everyone. It's Sheila Zilinsky for this Monday, March 5th, 2018. Thank you so very much for taking the time to tune into this shorter show today where I'm going to be doing all the talking. And I've been getting a lot of emails, a lot of people asking, hey, what is your take on all this stuff going on with the NRA? What's your take on what Trump is doing? What's going on with the Second Amendment? Of course, in the wake of the school shooter in Florida. And today I'm going to respond to some of those questions. And I want to read you something that I wrote a couple years ago. And here it goes. At the point of the triangle-shaped lexicon green battlefield can be found one of the most celebrated American symbols, sculptor Henry Hudson Kitson's statue of Captain John Parker, who commanded the Minuteman Militia on April 19, 1775. On that day and in that place, the opening salvo was fired in the American War for Independence. The Minuteman statue captures the essence of an armed free citizenry. It also symbolizes the inescapable connection between the right of Americans to bear arms and our national independence. The iconic symbol is therefore an affront to the sensibilities of those who believe that peace and security are best preserved through disarmament, not only of Americans but civilians worldwide. The clash of arms at Lexington Green and Concord's North Bridge was triggered by the world's mightiest power attempting to seize weapons and bring their weapons under the government's control. Captain John Parker's Minuteman and Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith's Redcoats fought a battle over the issue of disarmament. It was the intention of the British imperial power to disarm the Americans that provided the impetus for America's war for independence. The logic of gun prohibition dictates that the best way to fight crimes committed with firearms is to focus on the weapon rather than the criminal. Where have we heard that? This, in turn, leads to the restrictions on the liberties of the law-abiding, which supposedly will help prevent crimes committed by the lawless. We're wearily familiar with these same policies that play such a prominent role in our domestic debate over what is misleadingly called gun violence and gun control. Americans are being sold a bill of goods that the right to keep and bear arms, it must be abolished in order to prevent crimes committed by terrorists and crime syndicates. And those who see the government as a benevolent parent looking out for your best interests, you are sadly duped. But to those who see the government as inherently corrupt, the Second Amendment is a means of ensuring that the populace will always have a defense against threats to their freedoms. The Second Amendment statement of the right to bear arms serves as a check on the political power of the ruling authorities. It represents an implicit warning against governmental encroachments on one's freedom. It's the warning shot over the bow to discourage any lawful violations of our persons or our property. And as such, it reinforces that necessary balance in the citizen-state relationship. And as George Orwell noted, that rifle hanging on the wall of the working class flat or the laborer's cottage is the symbol of democracy, and it's our job to see that it stays there. So let's use that as a backdrop as I lay out some of my points today. You gotta love these clowns at the Oscars, don't you? Can you imagine if we had our schools, our children guarded like we saw at the Oscars? A myriad of police and armed guards and private security entourages, no gun-free zones at the Oscars. You know, every one of these movie actors, they have guns, sex, violence, just a plethora of that in their movies. The very things they say they hate, their movies are full of. Isn't that ironic? All these little political causes, Me Too, Time's Up, all these movements. Where's the March Against Child Pedophilia, by the way? Oh, that's right. Hollywood celebrates pedophilia. Didn't that show clean up at the Oscars? Call Me By Your Name. Oh yeah, drama romance, all right. The romance blossoms between a, 16-year-old, 17-year-old and the older man hired as his father's research assistant. Gay pedophilia is celebrated in Hollywood. Or sex with a fish hybrid. That cleaned up at the Oscars too. But then, salacious depravity, the more perverted, the better in Hollywood. But I digress. when they're not giving us an anti-gun lecture. They're bashing Trump and Mike Pence at every chance they can get. If you're a conservative Christian, look out. When are these liberal lackeys not ubiquitously proselytizing their anti-gun oratory? Yet this same ilk that supports the extermination of life profiteers I call Planned Parenthood, while at the same time they vociferously anathematize the NRA. Kind of ironic now that I think of the NRA is an organization determined to help save lives. Yeah, we're going to listen to anti-gun lectures from people who are okay with butchering babies? Yeah, I don't think so. You know, this whole illogical lunacy is mind-numbing. I'm not even going to talk about the Oscars, really. That's not the reason for this show today. I do want to talk about something else, and it's a statement that Donald Trump made. It's cause for concern. And I want you to listen to this clip.
But the ability to go to court, obtain an order, and then collect not only the firearms, but any weapons in the possession of that individual.
Or might take the firearms first and then go to court, because that's another system. Because a lot of times by the time you go to court, it takes so long to go to court to get the due process procedures. I like taking the guns early, like in this crazy man's case that just took place in Florida. He had a lot of firearms. They saw everything. To go to court would have taken a long time. So you could do exactly what you're saying, but take the guns first, go through due process second.
Okay, let me comment on that. No, no, and no. Due process is not taking the firearms first and then going to court. When you're a danger to yourself or others, yeah, we get it. That's different. Weapons can be removed, but we better be careful on this. Due process to permanently remove someone's constitutional right, that's a big deal. Due process is going to court first. We have to be clear on that. Can you imagine the usurpations and abuses as we acquiesce to that kind of a ruling? Can you imagine the liberals having that kind of clout to take guns first and ask questions later? Due process is not open for discussion, President Trump. You don't put new rules upon existing failing rules already. There's enough gun control legislation. The answer is no. And a lot of people think he was just quipping there, but that statement should have us all raising eyebrows. What part of shall not infringe do people not get? Slightly infringe, somewhat infringe, vaguely infringe, moderately infringe, just a touch of infringement. No infringement. You know, ironically, the Constitution is written as a bulwark against this very thing. The Constitution was written to protect us from people who do not believe we need a Constitution to protect us. That is the irony. You know, think about what these people even believe. I learned some really fascinating things from liberals about firearms this past few weeks. There are fully automatic magazines. Really? There's a full semi-automatic firing mode. Is that right? Apparently, we still use clips. And apparently, according to liberals, the AR in AR-15 stands for assault rifle, not Armalite rifle. That is fascinating. I'm sure you're picking up on my heavy sarcasm. And I learned something else from liberals about firearms this week. Revolvers don't fire with each trigger pulled. It is amazing, the mindless minions out there that are regurgitating this rhetoric. It's incredible to me. Listen, the bottom line here is criminals don't care about gun laws, folks. They live and thrive off violence. Whatever they're doing is not legal. They go and get their firearms wherever they want, and they don't fill out any paperwork. You know, speaking of liberals, they love stats. So let's look at some stats from 2016. There was 487 homicides in Chicago. 362 homicides were in Baltimore. 343 homicides were in Detroit, and 119 homicides were in Washington, D.C. And that's, by the way, a 57% increase over prior years. So let's just break this down. Basically, 25% of all gun crime happens in just 4 cities. Oh, and what is unique about those 4 cities is that they have the strictest gun laws. So it's not the lack of law that is the root cause here. And I'm going to say this really slow today. The Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, folks, is a bulwark against tyranny. That's its fundamental purpose. Tyrannical regimes take the guns from the masses, and then what happens? Disarmament always precedes mass death. Mao, Stalin, Pol Pot, Hitler, Idi Amin, ask all those under their regime. Oh, that's right, you can't because they're all dead. You know, all this stuff coming up about the NRA this, the NRA that. Folks, this is not about the NRA. The National Rifle Association is America's longest-standing civil rights organization with more than 5 million members, and they are proud defenders of history's patriots and diligent protectors of the Second Amendment, but this isn't about the NRA. Why do Democrats keep bringing up the NRA? Because these crony capitalists, these phony corporations are now turning on the NRA. Yes, folks, we should defend the NRA, but this isn't about the NRA. This is about you and me. This is about our liberty. And nowhere in these town hall meetings or in any other meetings for that matter that I've seen, no one here is talking about the Bill of Rights. I didn't hear anybody stand up and talk about the reason for the Second Amendment. At no time did I hear anyone stand up and talk about individual liberty, that everybody under 21 years old or between the ages of 18 and 21 is not mentally ill, is not irresponsible, is not going to shoot up the place any more than anybody over 65 is going to do it. They're chasing phony issues here. Oh, we need to look at everybody who's mentally ill, whatever that means. Everyone who is mentally ill is not a would-be killer. And what do we mean by mentally ill? They don't even define themselves. They're going to steal your liberty and everyone's okay with it because, hey, we got to do something about the mentally ill and the people under 21. That, to me, is lunacy. Trump just recently vowed tougher background checks, mental health screens for gun buyers and meetings with students. We saw that. And I'm telling you right now that including mental health, air quote, restrictions and background checks for gun purchases is going to open Pandora's box for backdoor gun control. You can take that to the bank. This is as draconian as a proposal that it can be. Think of it. What gun grabbers like Chris Murphy could not accomplish with anti-gun Barack Obama in the White House, they are about to accomplish it with pro-gun Donald Trump in the White House. Ironic. Ponder that one for a while. Any mental health restrictions for gun purchases will be couched in a catch-all language that could be applied to virtually anyone that a government bureaucrat wants it applied to. There's over 300,000 U.S. veterans as of 2 years ago, and they're already being denied purchases because they've been diagnosed with PTSD. And this is before Trump's tighter restrictions. Mental health could include things like a person's age, the kind of prescription medication one takes, or even one's own belief system. We, as conservative Christians, are already being labeled as extremists and potentially dangerous. This is even on record. See, there's precedents of police agencies labeling conservatives as extremist and potentially dangerous. A few years ago, Missouri Law Enforcement Agency referred to certain Christians and conservatives as extremists and potentially dangerous, and even being possible domestic terrorists. People who opposed any of the following were directly inferred in the Missouri police report. Check this out. This is people who opposed any of the following: New World Order, the United Nations, gun control, the violation of Posse Comitatus, the Federal Reserve, the income tax, the Ammunition Accountability Act, the North American Union, radio frequency identification, RFID. If you oppose that, if you oppose abortion on demand, if you oppose illegal immigration, well, guess what? You are a good fit for an extremist, a domestic terrorist. And then we're told, oh, you don't need these magazines with over 30 rounds. How do I know that? Maybe I do need a magazine with 30 bullets. Oh, but here we're on the defense once again, constantly defending the Constitution, constantly defending the Bill of Rights, as if you and I are responsible for killing people, when you and I are insisting that local, state, and federal governments protect our children in the classroom. Not all teachers, but maybe retired cops and retired military, ones who are comfortable doing it, certainly. What, we care about our money, so we protect our banks with armed guards? American airports, office buildings, courthouses, even sports stadiums are protected with armed security. You know, we care about our president, so we protect him with armed Secret Service agents. But when it comes to our most beloved, innocent, and vulnerable member of the American family, our children, we as a society leave them every day utterly defenseless and sickly. The monsters and the predators of the world, they know it and they exploit it. So back to what I said, Chicago, the nation's murder capital, if a criminal is going to break the law, they will find a way. The world isn't perfect, but you can't regulate it to perfection. There's about one gun for every citizen inside the United States already. At least that's what they say, but I think it's probably way more. Even if the government wanted to, they couldn't control guns already present or guns that would find their way into those hands who want them. And the redundant mantra of gun grabbers, it's the job of the police to protect us. Only professional law enforcement officers are qualified to protect us. Citizens should not bear arms because it's the job of policemen to protect us. These are statements that we've heard. What? This mass shooting in Parkland proves this absolute fallacy. Why, oh why is it that after a mass shooting spree, they always want to take the guns away from the people who didn't do it? I, for one, would not want to live in a society where the only people allowed guns are the police and the military, especially in the American police state. Police have a tendency, not always, but sometimes, to shoot first and ask questions later. There are cases where police have shot and killed Americans for standing a certain way, moving a certain way, holding something, behaving oddly, acting nervous. The police could misinterpret it to be a gun. We've seen cases of this. And what's shocking is that courts have consistently ruled that it is not the responsibility of a police officer to protect the citizen. It is the responsibility of the citizen to protect himself. All of this talk about cops protecting us is a myth. Plus, we see how good that turned out with the cops at the school, didn't we? So think about it. Under our Constitution and laws, police officers have no obligation to protect the American citizenry. But at the same time, our politicians, the fake news orgy we call a media, and most public school administrators and police chiefs insist that the American citizenry not be allowed to protect itself? If this isn't madness, then there's no such thing. And who exactly do they serve, the police, if not you and me? Protect and serve. The words define the mission of the police, which is to protect citizens and serve the public, not protect officers and serve the police force. And so back to Trump. Trump's supposed to be a big proponent of the Second Amendment. He's a pro-gun guy, right? And I'd like to remind Mr. Donald Trump, in a speech last year to the NRA, you said, "You have a true friend and champion in the White House. No longer will federal agencies be coming after law-abiding gun owners. No longer will the government be trying to undermine your rights and your freedoms as Americans." I hate to say this, but what he's doing lately is making me very nervous because it's looking like he's caving on that very statement. Now, some of you have emailed me and said, no reason to fret. I'm sure I'm sure Donald Trump is just 10 steps ahead of them. I'm sure Donald Trump just wants to meet them halfway. It's just backgrounds and bump stocks. Oh, just bump stocks and background checks, huh? Really? And then when that doesn't get the job done, that doesn't get the desired effect, you're not going to just stop there. This is the problem, folks. This so-called gun control, it never stops because it never gets the desired effect. I'm not liking how Donald Trump, Florida Governor Rick Scott, and other Republicans are joining with the Democrats in abandoning their support for the Second Amendment and are already pushing for more gun control. I applaud Trump for talking about arming teachers, but his decision to enact more gun control is patently inexcusable, folks. That is what I believe. Just last Wednesday, Trump scolded Republican congressmen for wanting to include a national reciprocity for concealed carry and instead supported the Joe Manchin Pat Toomey gun control bill. This bill will outlaw the private sale of firearms at gun shows and the private sale of firearms, period. Oh, and by the way, this is the exact same universal background check legislation that was proposed by one Barack Hussein Obama in the aftermath of the Sandy Hook shootings in 2013. Remember that? And the very same bill that was defeated by the Democrat Senate that same year. Stop and let that sink in. Trump wants to raise the age for all gun purchases to 21. He wants to add mental health restrictions to firearm background checks and bolster the National Instant Crime Background Check System. He'll also back the Stop School Violence Act, which gives the Justice Department grants for preventing school violence, whatever that means, and get rid of bump stocks and other firearm modifiers. So let's go back to what we were talking about earlier when Trump said take the guns first, go through due process second? I'm sorry, folks, that's not how it works. Anyone who believes in the Constitution and the rule of law, that should make us very nervous. These are not the words of the president of a constitutional republic. But I'm willing to give Donald Trump a lot of latitude here. But folks, do you really want to live in a country where government bureaucrats are authorized to send stormtroopers to your house to confiscate your most basic freedom, the right to keep and bear arms without any due process? I can see that going wildly wrong. Mr. Trump, I really hate to think that you are tiptoeing on being a traitor to the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, Republican government, and every sacred principle enshrined in our Bill of Rights, and I pray not. But it looks kind of like one more mass shooting, and Donald Trump and both sides of the aisle in Congress will do what deep state freedom haters have been trying to accomplish for decades: ban the sale and possession of AR-15 rifles. More than anything else, the AR-15 rifle, it is the people's most effective tool impeding the goals and ambitions of those who would turn America into a totalitarian police state. Self-defense is more than a right guaranteed in the Second Amendment, folks. It's a duty assigned to us by our Creator. For anyone, especially a Christian, to willingly surrender their means of self-defense, that's not only a crime against liberty. To me, that's a sin against God. Any law demanding the citizenry to surrender their AR-15 rifles would be unconstitutional, unnatural, and unbiblical, and no Christian or other free man should ever comply with such a law. I know there's a lot of people out there, a lot of Christians, even pastors, that think we ought to obey the government. We should outlaw our guns. They're wrong biblically, they're wrong morally, and they're wrong constitutionally. These deep state minions, the George Soros and all these ilk, they're not going to stop until America's disarmed. Even if they stage some of these false flags themselves, and that has happened. You know, there's another common denominator that never makes sense of all these shootings. They never make sense. Their eyewitness reports are always strange, very sketchy details, and they don't pass the smell test. And what do they all have in common? It's always some random lone gunman with no rhyme or reason, and it's always a situation where the FBI is never doing its job. Look at the Florida shooting in the Pulse nightclub. How many times did that guy come up on the radar of the FBI? And then there's just the litany of bizarre circumstances that never seems to add up. And then you throw in the factor, a lot of these kids are MK Ultra, mind controlled. And it's no wonder that people question these things, because it never adds up. What would cause any American citizen, folks, to take a firearm or any other weapon for that matter and just start killing people indiscriminately? Such a horrific act that defies all understanding and reason. It simply is not in the hearts of the common people to do such things. Something has to take place to dramatically and completely eradicate man's natural instincts. For lack of a better word to say it, this person's brain must be cross-wired. When you remove all feelings of natural empathy and replace it with something that motivates them to callously take the lives of even women and children, that doesn't just happen naturally. Evil exists. There's only two things that I believe causes this. One, demonic possession or government-sponsored mind control programs, and they always include the use of psychotropic drugs. In every covert government false flag attack, the mind-controlled Manchurian candidate, this patsy, must have a handler, or maybe several handlers. First, to make sure the patsy carries out the assignment, and secondly, to make sure the patsy isn't left alive to talk about it. Is always the case, isn't it? It is time to get back to praying over our families, folks. I believe prayer is powerful, but there's also some other action required. Remember the book of Acts? It's not just about praying, folks. There has to be some action as well. It is time that we called out our employees, by the way. Government doesn't tell us what to do. We tell them, FYI. It's not up to somebody else to do it. It's not up to your neighbor. It's up to each one of us to demand that our state and federal legislators remove existing gun control laws and completely expunge these gun-free zones, or as I call shooting fish in a barrel. We got to get rid of these gun control laws and the gun-free zones. It's a matter of life and death. And secondly, the American people need to arm themselves and bear those arms in every public gathering in which they attend. Because whether these perpetrators are lone wolf or demon-possessed or mind-controlled executioners of the dark side of the government, it doesn't matter. The victims are just as dead either way. It's not enough to say we believe in the Second Amendment. It is time for the American people to get serious about keeping and bearing arms. We either arm and protect ourselves or we're helpless chattel. It's time for the American people to stop giving these mass shooters so many shots. A few dead shooters at the hand of armed citizens with limited casualties due to the prevalence of arms in any public gathering would put a stop to this nonsense. And personal aversion to a firearm, that's no longer an excuse. Oh, well, I'm not comfortable with it. Well, then you need to get comfortable with it. The lives of you and your loved ones are at stake, and God wants you around. There are plenty of amazing and knowledgeable firearms instructors that can teach you everything you need to know to be able to defend yourself and your loved ones. I've had them on my show before. I had them on my gun roundtable. We need to add one more common denominator to these shootings. From the time the attacker tries to open fire, he gets shot by an armed citizenry. Enacting more gun control is unacceptable, but it's exactly what Trump has announced he's doing. And for that, folks, I cannot help but feel very uncomfortable. And have you seen the writing in these bills? The wording of these gun control bills is so vague that the ATF or a gun-grabbing judge could interpret the bills to mean just about anything. It's a clever way of giving the government another opportunity to ban whatever it wants. And then there's this. During last Tuesday's White House press briefing, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders was asked if President Trump supports reinstating the 1994 to 2004 assault weapons ban. And Sanders responded by saying, "We haven't closed the door on any front." Well, that's hardly the response one would expect to receive from a committed pro-Second Amendment president. And of course, Trump raising the minimum age for buying a rifle, or at least certain types of rifles. Everyone knows he's referring to AR-15 style rifles. My response to that is if 18-year-olds are too young to purchase AR-15 semi-automatic rifles, well then aren't they definitely too young to serve in the U.S. military and fire everything from an M16 and an M4 fully automatic rifle to even machine guns to Gatling guns? Trump did say one good thing this week. He suggested arming teachers would help deter gun violence in schools. And if he had just said that and left the rest out, that would have been a fantastic response. But let's see which of Trump's proposals will be left standing at the end of the day. These new gun control measures, they should be cause for concern, because they have the potential to wind up being the law of the land. Instead of talking about more gun control, he should be expunging existing gun control laws. The answer to gun violence is for government to get rid of their life-endangering gun control laws and let the American people lawfully arm themselves. In other words, the pro-gun GOP White House and Congress should immediately eliminate Americans' gun-free zones. Because in my opinion, and this is just me talking, there's only one antidote for mass shootings, and that's an armed citizenry. Gun control laws and gun-free zones facilitate mass shootings. And every parent of every school-age child needs to start demanding that their states immediately allow the adult teachers, faculty, staff, custodians, etc., who are willing and able to do so, arm themselves on school property and in the classroom. I got a news flash, folks. Criminals and mass murderers, they don't pay attention to gun control laws. The school in Florida was a gun-free zone. That didn't stop the killer from using a gun to kill people, did it? You know what? There's only one way to stop a bad guy with a gun, and that's a good guy with a gun. Donald Trump promised that he would be a trusted pro-Second Amendment president, but now he's himself enacting more gun control laws that will be used by gun-grabbing bureaucrats and judges and deep state minions to come after law-abiding gun owners, and it'll further allow the government to undermine our rights and our freedoms as Americans. The amount of gun control bills already in the U.S. House and Senate, they're staggering. Each of these bills, folks, is an egregious assault against the Second Amendment, but the proposed bills that would ban parts that increase the rate of fire for a semi-automatic firearm is especially draconian. Donald Trump, like I said, is supposedly pro-Second Amendment. He would never sign a gun control bill into law. Well, are you willing to bet your AR-15 on it? An armed American citizenry comprises the militia and is constitutionally authorized to provide lawful defense against any violent threat to life and liberty. It is not the job, like I said earlier, for the police to protect us, and it never will be. Police in Las Vegas didn't save one single life. Police at this recent Florida shooting, they didn't save one single life. You know what any gun control law does? It restricts law-abiding people from being able to protect themselves. Plus, to enact any gun control laws is to give in to this erroneous notion that an inanimate object is the source of evil and that we must allow government to exercise dominion over our liberties in the name of protecting us from some inanimate object, whatever it is. That presupposition, folks, is fatally flawed. It's back to what Craig Sawyer said. Do you start banning trucks? And I often hear well-intentioned people say things like, well, if we have to surrender our semi-automatic rifles, it doesn't violate the Second Amendment. In my opinion, the semi-automatic rifle is the only defense tool that's capable of defending liberty. People who say these things, folks, they don't know anything about the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was not designed so we could go target shooting or duck hunting or deer hunting. Oh, you don't need 30 rounds to hunt. That's right. But the Second Amendment is not written in case the deer turn against us. I've said it before. The Second Amendment was designed to ensure that the American people always maintain their role as a citizen militia in order to defend the citizenry against armed aggressors or tyrannical forces. Whether those aggressors are domestic or foreign or our very own government, I'll say it straight out. The semi-automatic rifle is exactly what the Second Amendment is talking about. I hear these pastors and Christians say, well, if government demands that we give up our semi-autos, as Christians, we should submit and surrender those arms. I say, bravo, Sierra. Christians are given no such instructions, only except from these sorry, mealy-mouthed, squeamish, sheepish slaves of the state preachers. Maybe those ones. Maybe these men that don't have the testicular fortitude to stand up for anything. We're doing exactly what our founders warned us not to. I'm telling you, folks, we cannot sit back while they come for our guns. Recognize your God-given right to defend yourselves. Every capable adult who cares about the lives and the safety of their loved ones and who care about the preservation of liberty, you should own a semi-automatic rifle. And along with plenty of ammunition, know how to use it, know how to be prepared to use it when it's needed. And there is really no additional act of gun control needed. There's no reason for one additional act of gun control, folks. Each mass shooting that takes place in this country is only further proof that gun control laws do not work and that gun-free zones do not work. And instead of talking about additional control, the American people need to rise up and start demanding that the Congress and the White House, who, by the way, work for us, expunge existing gun control laws and gun-free zones. Because back to what I said earlier, the Second Amendment stands as the Founding Fathers' clear and unmistakable legal statement that an armed citizenry is the bulwark of liberty and provides the fundamental basis for law-abiding Americans to defend themselves, their families, their communities, and their nation against all aggressors, including, ultimately, a tyrannical government. The Second Amendment is the last line in the defense of American liberty. To gun control specialists, this argument is deeply troubling. They worry that any armed person with a beef against the government will look to the Second Amendment for encouraging to lock and load and then rain down armed force in the face of what he or she perceives as tyranny. Even Scalia himself said that self-defense is lawful. And let's take a lesson from history. During the 20th century, more than 70 million people, after first being disarmed, were slaughtered by their own governments. The pattern appeared in Ottoman Turkey, the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, occupied Europe, nationalist China, communist China, Uganda, Cambodia, Rwanda, just to name a few. The Second Amendment was created as the final barricade against the unthinkable, the day when the rest of our constitutional safeguards have failed us and we stand exposed to the brutal reality that so many in history have understood only too late. The simple truth is that tyranny thrives best where government need not fear the wrath of an armed people. The loss of rights happens gradually, folks. The steady decline of our liberties over the last decades. It's been, as I always say, a case of the frog in the boiling water. Slowly we're acclimated to giving up one right at a time, one freedom at a time. And today, we shrug off things our nation's founders would have never tolerated. Little by little, one right at a time slips away, and once established, tomorrow that same authority becomes a basis for ignoring the entire Bill of Rights. One step at a time, with each step being justified by the noblest rhetoric, our freedom is lost forever. Our founding fathers endowed us with a heck of a trust fund, not in gold, but in protection for our God-given rights. The Bill of Rights and the Constitution, they're not grantors of our liberty, they're guardians of it. They knew when writing those documents the effects of big government. They knew the importance of having the right to defend oneself, the right to free speech, the right to own property, the right to trial by one's peers. They didn't know this because they had them, but because at one time they didn't have them. They understood the effect a tyrannical dictator or a ruthless king can have on a life. America's become the country it is today not because of massive government, but because of its denial of massive government. America, I believe, is still the greatest country in the world, but it's losing what made it great. Thomas Paine's impassioned plea in 1776, it didn't just foreshadow much of the substance of the Declaration of Independence, but it ignited a spark in the hearts of people. His urging of a new beginning in the struggle for freedom was distinguished not only by his ideas, but more importantly by his passion. Edmund Burke once said, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And consider the words of John Hancock, one of the signers of the Declaration. I conjure you, by all that is dear, by all that is honorable, by all that is sacred, not only that ye pray, but that ye act. And really, we're only left with one question. Why haven't we acted? I hope you enjoyed the show today. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Simply go to www.sheila.media. Thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. God bless.